Well, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, depending upon where you live. We're thrilled that you're here. My name is Steve Grossman. I'm privileged to serve as CEO of ICIC, the Initiative for a Competitive Intercity. I want to welcome all of our participants and express gratitude for your engagement in this critical, timely discussion. Let me just tell you a little bit about ICIC for those who aren't familiar. ICIC is a 30-year-old nonprofit founded by Harvard Business School professor Dr. Michael Porter. Originally started as a research organization, we now offer a series of programs all over the country in a variety of topics, all of which are for small businesses. We provide education, technical assistance, one-on-one coaching, and access to capital. Our goal is to create sustainable small business ecosystems in our most underserved and under-resourced communities. And you're going to hear a lot about those underserved and under-resourced communities a little bit later during this webinar. So thanks very much for joining us. Before I introduce the topic and introduce two of my colleagues who are going to speak briefly, I want to thank my colleagues. In addition to Howard Weil, our research director, whom I'll introduce momentarily, I want to thank his colleagues, Devin Yee and Miles Chandler. I want to thank our communications team, Sarah Ganan, and most notably, Jasmine Martin. Thank you very much for your leadership in helping to put this together. So this is a collaborative effort, this webinar and this topic. I want to highlight that this research is a collaboration between ICIC and Small Business Majority, combining expertise in addressing structural barriers and policy advocacy. This is a joint initiative designed to uncover the impact of structural racism on small business success in the top 100 metropolitan areas. This project, supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, addresses how structural racism, systems that disadvantage certain racial or ethnic groups, affects entrepreneurship, particularly in under-resourced communities. So let me just introduce very quickly two of my colleagues who will speak sequentially. First, we're privileged to have with us John Arensmeier, founder and CEO of Small Business Majority. John has used his long experience as a small business owner to build SBM into a nationally recognized organization focused on empowering America's entrepreneurs to build a thriving and equitable economy. Small Business Majority is the leading advocate for critical public policy issues facing America's small businesses. Prior to launching Small Business Majority 18 years ago, John was the founder and CEO of ACI Interactive, an award-winning international interactive communications company. So he knows exactly what he's talking about when he addresses the challenges faced by small businesses. You may have seen him frequently on various TV and radio shows, including MSNBC, PBS, Fox News, Bloomberg, NPR, and the CBS Evening News. So welcome, John, and thanks so much for being our partner, not just on this project, but in so many other ways over the years. You'll also hear from my colleague, Howard Weil. Howard Weil is Senior Vice President and Director of Research at ICIC. Dr. Weil is a specialist in urban and regional economic development and is responsible for designing and overseeing a research agenda to promote the revitalization of economically depressed communities. Howard's had a long association with a variety of entities, state of Pennsylvania, the University of Illinois at Chicago, and has had a long-time association with the Brookings Institution. Howard holds a PhD in economics from MIT and a JD from the Yale Law School. So it is now my privilege to introduce first John Arensmeier, CEO of Small Business Majority, followed directly by Howard Weil, ICI's Senior Vice President and Director of Research. John, take it away.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thanks for the generous introduction. And just wanted to mention, we have, as part of our work, we have a network of over 85,000 small businesses. And we have partnerships with about 1,500 business and community organizations where we collaborate to deliver resources to entrepreneurs and to advocate for public policy solutions that promote inclusive small business growth. We place a special focus on the smallest businesses and those facing systemic inequities. 2/3 of our network consists of BIPOC small business owners, and 2/3 are women. As such, we focus primarily on breaking down barriers to equitable and inclusive entrepreneurship. Our work is bolstered by extensive research and deep connections with the small business community that enable us to educate stakeholders about key issues impacting America's entrepreneurs. And for this project, I want to thank our research team of Brian Pfeiffer and Ira Gottlieboim, who have worked closely with the folks at ICIC to move this project forward. While our research for years has highlighted the challenges that minority business owners face, this is the first time we've actually been part of an effort to produce an interactive tool that brings deeper statistics to life. We're proud to partner with ICIC and leverage their unique insights and innovative data to help create a clear picture of the minority small business experience through this new mapping tool. And I also want to thank the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for their generous support. Look, this new tool is really important because we know from our work that small businesses in under-resourced communities have faced disproportionate barriers to business formation and growth. And unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated these impediments. Just a few data points from our research over the past 3 years. White business owners were more likely to obtain pandemic-era relief funding compared to Black and Latino-owned businesses. The 2023 Federal Reserve Small Business Credit Survey on startup firms found that Black businesses continue to struggle to access the capital they need to grow their new enterprises. And a recent survey found that Black-owned firms were 42% more likely to experience revenue decreases over the prior quarter compared to white-owned businesses. But until now, we didn't have neighborhood-level data showing us exactly what those challenges look like on the ground. And look, we can't solve these problems without data that clearly illustrates what's wrong. This is particularly important right now as we see a tremendous upsurge in small business formation. 19 million new registrations in the past 3.5 years, a significant turnaround from pre-pandemic trend. And even more significant, the percentage of Black business growth has been almost 8 times greater than the average for all businesses, with increases in Latino and Native-owned businesses greater than the general trend as well. This timely new tool will show us exactly where the barriers are for minority-owned small businesses, providing us with the information we need to raise awareness with lawmakers and other stakeholders, and to design and direct effective solutions to the problem. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Howard.
Thanks, John. As both John and Steve mentioned, this project received very generous support from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and I'd just like to deliver a few brief remarks on behalf of the foundation. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is dedicated to taking bold leaps to transform health in our lifetime. Together with its grantees and partners, the foundation is working toward a future where health is no longer a privilege, but a right. ICIC was selected to be part of a cohort of just 8 grantees to visualize the role of structural racism, place, and the implications that racism has on population health, broadly conceived. Data visualization, or tools that make it easy to visualize complex measures, can be a powerful means to communicate data showing racism's impact on communities, and it can also be a powerful means to contextualize the legacy of racism. The funding structure that the foundation created for this project fostered collaboration between researchers, data producers, communications experts, and national-level social change organizations. So for our particular collaboration, ICIC is the data and data visualization and data production expert. Small Business Majority is the national social change organization dedicated to improving equity and inclusivity in small business ecosystems. And we work together with a third partner, One Visual Mind, which served as the communications and design expert on the project. And I'd now like to introduce my colleagues, Devin Yee and Miles Chandler, who will describe the data visualization tool. Devin was principal investigator on this project. Both Devin and Miles are senior research associates at ICIC. They're both experts in data analysis, data visualization, and the impacts of structural racism on small business. And they collaborated to conceptualize and coordinate the entire project. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Devin Yee, who will introduce our visualization tool. Devin.
Thanks, Howard. I will talk a bit about an introduction to our interactive tool, Structural Barriers to Small Business Success. Next slide, please. I would like to briefly acknowledge our project team. As was mentioned, this is a collaboration between ICIC, Small Business Majority, One Visual Mind, and Arsenal Productions, and it was truly a joint effort to create this project. Next slide, please. And to speak a little bit about the background of the project, as Howard mentioned, this was in response to a challenge issued by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to effectively communicate using data how conditions of place are shaped by structural racism in ways that negatively impact community health. And here we understand economic health and the health of small businesses to impact community health. Next slide, please. So how do we examine structural racism? We show the impacts of structural racism or systems of society that advantage people from certain racial or ethnic backgrounds and disadvantage people from other backgrounds via differential revenue, size, and concentration of businesses in communities of color and under-resourced communities. And here we allow users to further explore the inequities within their communities through our mapping tool. Our project is a visualization tool, and it allows users to show the ways in which race and place are related to business owner and worker success. We show how business owner race and majority racial group of neighborhoods affect business presence or a number of businesses and business revenue. Users can explore industry-specific and business size-specific patterns at both the neighborhood or census tract and metro level. And now I will turn it over to my colleague, Miles Chandler, to talk a little bit about more how these are actualized in our visualization tool.
Yeah, thanks, Devin. Let me switch over here. So when you open our tool, you're greeted with this national level map of the United States, the breakout box for the urban Honolulu metro area over here. You're able to select from any of the 100 largest metro areas, either by clicking on them directly on the map or by searching for them by name in the search bar. Here, I'll just choose Chicago as an example. So as you zoom into the metro level extent on any of the 100 largest metro areas, you'll be greeted by this, this map of census tracts across the whole metro area. And then this kind of, well, at this scale, this kind of mess of blue dots on top of it. That represents business data, which I'll get to in a minute, but it's a little bit too much information for this scale. So we'll turn that off. This allows you to look at patterns of racial residents across a metro area. So these census tracts are color-coded by the majority racial group that lives in them. Majority Black areas are color-coded in blue, majority Latina areas are green, so on and so forth. We also include a category for neighborhoods that have no majority racial group. So where there's no one single racial group with 50% or more stake in that place. We also include a number of filters that allow you to, this is still a lot of information, so allow you to turn on and off certain groups of census tracts based on the majority racial group that lives there. So for example, we could select only Black majority census tracts in Chicago. Can also select any combination thereof. So Black and Latina would look like this, and so on and so forth. You're also able to filter by economic characteristics of neighborhood. So if I turn back on all the racial groups, we can use this under-resourced communities filter. Under-resourced communities are defined by ICIC as areas of high poverty and low income. So it's kind of a combined economic measure of the differential resources of communities. If we use this filter, it'll select only areas of high poverty and low income in Chicago. This is also responsive to the race filters, so we could select only Black under-resourced communities in Chicago. Now, this is a much more manageable slice of the city. So if we want to go back down here and turn on business data, we will see only these dots that are represented in Black under-resourced communities in Chicago. Each dot represents the sum of businesses located in that census tract. And as we zoom in a little more, we'll see that the dots become responsive to the numbers of businesses in that census tract. And this is a really handy way to get a kind of rough sense of business concentration across a neighborhood. The business characteristics filters also allow you to get a little more detail about the businesses themselves. So right now we're looking at all businesses located in Black under-resourced communities. Let's turn off the under-resourced communities filter for a minute. If we were, for instance, interested in just like accommodation and food services businesses in Chicago's under-resourced Black communities, we could make that selection, which narrows down the cohort quite a bit. We could similarly do that with business revenue groups and business employment size. So any number of these categories as well. So this is really useful for getting pretty granular information really quickly about what's going on at the neighborhood level in business communities in a certain city. We offer one additional level of detail. So if you were to be particularly interested in this census tract in particular, you can click on it and it'll bring up this area profile on the right that provides you all of the information included in the tool that we have for that particular census tract in one handy little postcard over here. So those are the main features of this map. We've also provided a number of metro and state level charts that allow you to compare business revenue across different groups to really judge the effects, the more systemic effects of racism across a metro area. So this first chart actually offers you detail that's not available in the map, which is the differential business revenue by the race of business owner. So rather than just referring to the majority race of a certain census tract, you can also look at how business owners of color are doing across a metro area compared to white-owned businesses. And in this instance, we see that Latina-owned businesses and Asian-owned businesses in Chicago are much more highly concentrated in the lowest revenue bucket than are Black-owned businesses or white-owned businesses or businesses owned by other racial groups. So this offers you a very high-level comparison between the effects that different races of ownership may have versus more like neighborhood-level racial characteristics. So this allows you to get at individual businesses versus more like ecosystem-level effects in an interesting way. We've also provided this information by under-resourced status of each of those tracts. So we've tabulated the business revenue of all businesses in a metro area based on whether or not they're in an under-resourced tract or not, and then provided the difference in median business revenue. This fourth chart here shows you an average weekly wage measure for each of the states that the metro area intersects. So the Chicago metro area intersects Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. So you can get some wage information based on business size for each of those states. And we generally see that smaller businesses are less able to pay high wages than are the largest businesses. That tends to be true across states with some variation. So that's kind of a broad overview of the core functionality of our tool. To get into some more creative uses, I'd like to now transition to the panel discussion portion of this webinar. So our panel discussants today are David Payton, who's the Executive Director of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program in New Orleans and a business advisor at Delgado Community College. We're also joined by Betsy Suchanek, who's the Inclusive Economic Development Advisor at Engine, which is the New Growth Innovation Network. And Tasha Brown was unfortunately able to make it today, so we're joined by Brian Pfeiffer, Vice President of Research and Insights at Small Business Majority. And just briefly before we begin the panel discussion, I'd like to shout out the chat. If you have any questions that are percolating throughout the discussion that you want to add into the chat, we'd be more than happy to answer them in the Q&A session afterwards. So welcome. Just to start things off, I'm hoping each of you can share a little bit about your work as it relates to small business and racial equity, broadly speaking. And I'll start things off with David.
So good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is David Payton. I'm the Executive Director of the Goldman Sachs, the 10,000 Small Businesses Program in the South Central region in New Orleans, Louisiana. And the Goldman Sachs program, the 10,000 Small Businesses Program, it's a national program with 23 locations around the United States, founded by Goldman Sachs, the Goldman Sachs Foundation, where we deliver a leadership and business growth accelerator program for small business owners, where we show folks how to grow and scale their business at no cost. So this program is about revenue growth and job creation and giving small business owners the tools and the executive education they need to grow and scale. So while this program is available to all business owners of all races, religions, gender identities, as it relates to racial equity, providing access to resources, this program is very important. We have over 15,000 graduates around the United States. 40% of our graduates are people of color, 50% are women. And to extend this opportunity to more diverse communities, we also partner with other agencies like the Urban League, the Black Chamber, Hispanic Chamber, National Supplier Diversity Council, and many, many more. I can go on if you like. I can. Miles.
No, that's great. Thanks, David. Betsy, do you want to jump in?
Absolutely. Thanks, Miles, and thanks, David. So this topic that we're talking about today is very near and dear to my heart because my career actually started in small business support and micro lending, where I spent every single day talking with entrepreneurs and business owners in much the same way that David talked about sort of the range of businesses that he's working with. And so when you start sort of having those conversations with business owners and entrepreneurs every single day, you really start seeing those sort of structural or systemic barriers play out in terms of who has access to funding, who has access to the networks and support that others don't. And really, you need to sort of understand and see these structures through a racial equity lens, because otherwise you're missing sort of a huge piece of the picture of who has access and who gets to be an entrepreneur and build wealth in that way in the US. And so it's all of sort of that work that really fuels a lot of my work at Engine. And we're a national organization that's focused on advancing inclusive economic development. So our work is more broad-based than just focusing in on small business specifically. We look at sort of the economic development field as a whole. So everything from workforce strategies to cluster strategies. But we look at everything through a racial equity lens. We use that as sort of the center of how we approach everything we do. And for me, that's a lot of the local projects and teams I work with, because we have to help them understand the structures and systems that have caused these major economic disparities in order to begin to repair them.
Thanks, Betsy. I'll go ahead and jump in. Hi, everyone. Brian Pfeiffer, Vice President of Research and Insights at Small Business Majority. Also work closely with Tasha Brown, our colleague in Illinois, who couldn't be here today. She leads our place-based work on the ground. And as John mentioned, we have kind of two prongs to our approach in addition to the research, which is education and resources to small businesses, focusing on the micro and BIPOC and other under-resourced entrepreneurs in the communities where they are, as well as advocating for policies on their behalf at the local, state, and federal level. In Chicago, we've been leading a multi-year effort called the Chicago Inclusive Growth Coalition, which is focused on coordinating the ecosystem of small business support and lending around improving small business outcomes, particularly in the South and West Sides, where we know historically historical redlining and other racial issues have caused widespread economic disparities and lack of wealth creation. And so this tool, I think is really helpful for us in that work on the ground. And we know across in Chicago and the 10 other states where we work, all this work is place-based. Every situation on the ground is different, and really being able to drill down to the local level is really important for us.
Great, thanks so much. David, you had one more point you wanted to throw in there.
I just wanted to add that in addition to, running the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Businesses Program relative to, racial equity and working with communities of color, in 2021, Goldman Sachs also launched the Deep South Economic Mobility Collaborative, which was a partnership between Hope Enterprise. Goldman put up about $130 million, pledging that among 7 city, 9 historical Black colleges and universities to help small business owners, to help people of color, small business owners and people of color in the Deep South territory. It was aimed at underserved and under-resourced communities. They followed up again in 2023. They launched the 1 Million Black Women Initiative, which they've deployed almost $2.1 million of investment capital, 2.1 billion, basically trying to help, cover that gap, close that gap of disparity for small women, for small businesses that women are starting. Black women are starting businesses faster than any other demographic. In this flagship initiative, it's a 10-week program and it's free for small female business owners, solopreneurs, and they're helping them to equip them with all the tools necessary for them to grow and scale their business against the odds.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you. So we're clearly filled with a room of consummate professionals in either the small business world, the racial equity world, or both. So what I'm really curious about is if you can each share, I know you've all had a chance to play with the tool a little bit. If you can share 1 or 2 ways that you found the tool useful for work you're currently doing in or engaged in, or even anything you found out about your community through it that you didn't know before. And we can go in the same order. So let's start with David and then Betsy and then Brian.
So I'll start off by saying, a couple of takeaways is I had an aha moment to get started, right? To be able to granularly, visually see how much of my community is under-resourced by census tracts and see the relationships between the racial makeups in these communities and how it impacts the types of businesses and industries, the size of the companies and the revenues in those areas, which are connected to jobs and family and wealth. Relative to the Goldman Sachs program, outreach is a very important part of what we do. So I need an application funnel of over 120 applications from business owners. And because the program outreach and recruiting is so important to us, it's imperative that our efforts are strategic, efficient, and effective. So this tool is going to allow me and my team to access more critical business data and information about the businesses we need to engage, many of which could be hiding in plain sight, right in my own territory under my feet. So this tool is going to somewhat be my drone, so I can see things from a bird's eye view, another level. It also may allow me to identify different trends and patterns, maybe some outliers more quickly that would be hidden in data and numbers. And in terms of the business owners that we serve, it's going to be this tool is going to be able to eliminate target customers, data for the business owners as they're putting together their growth plan for the next 5 years. Part of what they do in this program, they're going to be able to better target their customers, have more effective data. Bottom line is they're going to refine their marketing funnels, acutely target their customers, help them with market-driven data, with decisions about location opportunities, alignment of products and services, pricing, and potential market strategy.
That's awesome, David. I'm think definitely building on a lot of what you shared, that I saw a lot of those opportunities when I was using the tool. I'm sort of, my colleagues at Engine will tell you, and my constant refrain is like, we need more data, we need more data, we need more data. And it's even better when it's disaggregated by race. And so I think for us, as I was looking at it, I was sort of thinking about it twofold. One being is like, we're a national organization. And so the fact that we have consistent data across metro areas is huge, to be able to say, where are there greater disparities, or how does this actually break down within those metro areas? And being able to use that to like inform where we want to work, in the same way David was saying, and how he wants to reach those businesses, but to say, where are we seeing those greatest economic disparities, and how are we focusing our efforts there? Likewise, though, we work with so many local teams in city governments or community-based organizations that are seeking to advance inclusive economic development programs. So I was sort of interestingly sort of seeing that twofold piece around everything that David said around being able to focus in and use it to tailor outreach by being able to go all the way deep down into the census tract level and say, oh, this is where we can focus. But I also thought there's an interesting application for a lot of the teams that I work with on needing data to make the case for funding and resources, to say, we have real data here that shows the disparity, and being able to leverage this as a tool, both in terms of targeting their work, but also likewise being able to say and make the case for why this work needs to happen in the first place, whether that's city government or whether that's federal funding or any of those pieces. But I think that just having real data and making that accessible, makes it a lot easier for them to make that case versus trying to go out and survey themselves or do a whole community scan.
Absolutely. That's a great point, Betsy. And I'm a little biased because I was intimately involved in the creation of the tool, so I know it well. But we did share it out with our team, like Tasha and our other boots on the ground, so to speak, in our other states. And in reviewing Chicago, there are a number of, first off, all of the community-based groups we work with and policymakers and other stakeholders understand where the under-resourced communities are in Chicago. So that in itself isn't necessarily new, but tying it to the business data is new, right? In particular, there are a number of efforts, city-led and otherwise, trying to spur economic development in these communities. For instance, there's been a multi-million-dollar investment to improve the neighborhoods around United Center on the near west side of Chicago. And looking at the map, you see in those Black majority neighborhoods around the center, there aren't many food or retail establishments. So that provides an opportunity for economic developers and planners to try and attract those kinds of businesses into those communities as it seeks to revitalize that neighborhood with that larger scale investment. Same in the south side of Chicago and the far south side. There are a number of, Chicago's always been a transportation hub, and they're seeking to revitalize both rail and water transportation industry in that region to create more jobs and reestablish Chicago as that transportation hub. And when looking at the map, we noticed that there aren't very many transportation industry small businesses around those rivers and those railway systems, right? So as planners or community organizations are thinking about how to attract that kind of industry, having this data and this tool available to them will be critically important.
That's really great. It's quite a span of uses you've already found for it. Which is, I guess, kind of leading into my next question. And it's something David, I think, touched on briefly. But I want to zoom out a little bit and ask, think a little bit about why data visualizations such as structural barriers to business success, this tool we've created, why these are particularly useful or powerful tools to the work that you do in your respective fields. And we can keep the same order. Yeah.
I'll get started. Sorry about that. So the data visualization tools, basically they just help transform very complex data into digestible formats. It makes it more accessible to a wider audience to visualize it. And for some folks who may not have a technical background, it makes things clear. It also leads you to sometimes some quicker informed decision maker, because these visual tools can help you identify different trends and patterns, maybe even some outliers, more quickly being able to look at it than going into the data, the number, or the words. Again, getting into some more quickly informed data decision making. So taking that look at backing off of it, you may even be able to see some, highlight structural barriers that you really can't see in data that's laying right in front of you. So you can potentially identify some systemic issues and, then begin to prioritize some interventions and allocate the resources more effectively once you're able to see that. And that's also going to allow you to communicate this data more efficiently as well, and for the persons on the other side to be able to process it. It's I think that's it. Yeah.
Again, thanks so much, David. You're being brave by going first every time. So I'll also say I've already just to divulge that I am like a big data nerd. So more data, better every time. And I think that that's like one of the most important things from where we sit at Engine is like, we just totally need to rethink about how we're using data and metrics in general. But when you think about data visualizations as a tool, it's been really interesting for me watching this tool come together, the structural barriers tool, but also as sort of part of a suite of other efforts. So I saw Marcus's question in the chat around the Blackwell Data Center and the Color of Wealth report. And I think it's really interesting to see national organizations like ICIC and Small Business Majority taking on these projects that create access to local data in many ways for local communities, because it takes so much time and resource for local entities to be able to say, we're going to go survey everybody. Like, this gives them some baseline data in order to tailor and target. And I'll also say, I think for me, being able to use the data visualizations in this way, in particularly the geographic aspect of the map and looking at census tract level, is huge. I think as we continue to see sort of wealth inequality in our cities, we're seeing so much more economic segregation, which I think you really can see what this looks like in this map, where you're starting to say, oh, these are where businesses are and this is where they're not. And I think for us, like being able to see it on a map, being able to see those stark divides is one of the most powerful things we can do to sort of tell the story about why we need to do more to create more equitable small business ownership. So I could say 5 million more things all about data visualizations, but I will let Brian go ahead and share some thoughts.
Thanks, Betsy. Yeah, for us, as John mentioned at the top, this is the first time, we've ever leveraged data for a visualization, and for all the reasons both you and David mentioned, is perfect for helping folks really understand complex data in an easy way, right? For starters, and for us too in small business. And I think from where I sit on the research side, we've always struggled with really micro level data, neighborhood level data of businesses in census tracts. The census and other kind of large scale surveys often just get to the county or MSA level. So really being able to drill down is new and novel for us for sure. And we hope to, I think continue to update, keep this data updated moving forward, and helping practitioners and others stay up to date on, are your interventions being impactful? Are we seeing business growth in specific neighborhoods? Because I think long-term, that's a really powerful use for the tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with I agree with all those points. I too am a big nerd with data. I think more data is always better to the extent that you can always interpret it easily. Kind of to David's point, it's great to be able to have something to summarize things for you really succinctly. And we are visual creatures. So data visualization, elegant data visualization is kind of a tonic for the digital and big data era in my mind. And yeah, I hope to be able to continue to update this tool and produce others like it going forward. So those were all my questions. I'd like to now transition to the Q&A session. I see we've got a couple questions in the chat coming in already. I encourage you all to also share use cases you might be thinking of. I want this to be information sharing more broadly. So if you have questions about the tool itself, feel free to share those, or if you have, I see somebody has shared a way that they might want to use the tool. Yeah, I'd like to open it up just more generally for the rest of our time here. So we can start with Alana's comment. Opportunities to house my business in a thriving, supporting market to best scale and sustain my business. Was that a use case for the tool?
Yeah, this is Alana. That was a use case for the two. Like when I went on side to two, I'm located in Akron, Ohio. So when I was playing around or experimenting with the two, the only industries of growth that I was able to identify was construction. My business is professional services, which touches construction, but in terms of just thinking or forecasting for the next 5 years, I got a little scared because I didn't see a lot of mobility in terms of growth from the surrounding neighborhood or community for minority-owned businesses. So it was a shocking surprise, but as I went 50 miles out or greater, I was able to see where growth in terms of scaling and sustaining were available. So it was helpful for that, but it was a little scary, but thank you.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like a really great way to use this. I'm glad it's helpful for you. So Marquis' question, how does the tool link up with or synchronize with other platforms and tools like the Black Wealth Data Project or the New School's Color of Wealth report? We don't have any concrete plans to make it like directly linkable yet. I think it's certainly that would be a great next stage for the project in some way. I think that is one of the biggest fragilities of tools like these, is that they don't interact well with one another yet. I haven't had a chance to look at either of those things, but they very well could share some of the base data sources, or be otherwise compatible with this work. So that's a good direction to take, and I'm sure we'll follow up and look at that. Adam Engel asks, how frequently, or how will this be updated and how frequently? So similarly, we don't currently have any plans to update it. This was just the kind of a one shot using one data year. But that's certainly something we would love to do. I think this would become more and more powerful as it developed layers and more of a time series element to the data if we were able to do that. So we would love to do that. Carl Brown says, we found that many of our small Black-owned businesses didn't qualify for PPP or EIDL because of low credit scores, no business bank accounts, slow payments, and bankruptcies. Was this or similar data included in your research? That's definitely implicated in this research. And also panelists, if you have thoughts about this, feel free to chime in.
Yeah, definitely not. It's not directly included in the research. We weren't able to tie the business data that's presented in the map to access to PPP or not, but this is a similar experience in other research we at Small Business Majority done in ICIC as well. Yes, this was a common problem, and as Miles said, I think implicated by the map and the research as well, right?
Right, funding is one of the primary barriers to success, and not being creditworthy or not having enough in your bank account or not having generational wealth to pour into a business, that's those are all deeply implicated in that.
What I'd like to just point out, I think it was 2 questions before. The young lady asked about, she mentioned how she could potentially use that tool. But again, as a small business owner looking for opportunity and understanding how and where to deploy those resources, this is going to be a very powerful tool. Even in its first iteration, this tool is going to be able to give you some idea of where the people are, where your target customers are, and if you're pricing it for the right community, or even if you are in the right community, where you want to move forward, what's going to be your marketing strategy. This is going to be a really, really powerful kind of at-hand tool to be used by small business owners.
Absolutely.
I had a comment in there about whether or not you can search by date range. I'm just curious because in Salt Lake City, where we're located, a number of small businesses have been really adversely affected by road construction. And if I could do searches on how many small businesses were in a certain census tract, prior to and at certain stages throughout that project, that would be really useful information for our city.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, we our data are for one year, and you can't get more granular than that at this point. I mean, that would be an amazing feature to be able to include in this. As businesses are definitely affected by things as short term as that. Like that can have a huge impact on somebody's livelihood.
Yeah, it's definitely a goal of ours, to work with ICIC in the future if there are opportunities to implement those kinds of things. Because as I said, they're in Chicago and everywhere, right? Salt Lake City, you name it. There are a number of different economic development projects or other infrastructure projects, affecting small businesses, and being able to see the impacts of those economic development activities over time on small business would be a game changer.
Lehman Abrams asks, the Biden administration has passed several major economic acts aimed at revitalizing the U.S. economy, some of which have an equity focus, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS and Science Act, in addition to another. I'd like to explore if there's a way to use the tool to interact with these types of federal funding programs. Thank you very much. That would be a great idea. Howard, I don't know if you want to touch on the manufacturing report that we released last year at all. But I think that's definitely directly related to this.
Yes, we earlier in the year completed a major report on Black and Hispanic owned companies in key manufacturing industries and supply chains supported by the CHIPS and Science, Inflation Reduction and Infrastructure Acts. And if you could put that up against this tool and you'd get even more insights.
Yeah, I think supply chain mapping for industries affected by those acts, that's a really crucial piece of research to be done right now in this moment. And I think being able to take that and combine it with this level of geographic detail would be really fascinating. So again, another thing for the future, but yeah, that's right on the money.
Well, again, this is Lehman Abrams, and thank you for the response. And the report that Howard just mentioned, I guess I could find it at the ICIC website because it really follows up to the question that the earlier person made about we are a construction-related management business firm located in Oakland, California, and would be very interested in looking at some of the linkages between some of these big federal programs and how it at a very granular neighborhood level impacts small businesses who are in construction-related industries. So thank you again for the research and for your response, Howard.
I love what he just shared. If you really want to be intentional with helping small businesses, especially those that are Black and female at this time, using the data that you guys have and challenging or having real gainful conversations with the Department of Transportation, who's over the core of these infrastructure dollars through the Opportunity Infrastructure Plan that's being driven currently through policy. Because right now, if we use the map or if we go to the Department of Transportation or we go to those that are getting the heaviest of funding to sort of be more inclusive of Black, female, disadvantaged businesses, maybe this will help them with seeing where we're underutilized, if they're saying if they're really not capturing us. Because right now this is like a once in a lifetime opportunity on funding. And if we're just having these conversations B2B, and it's not going to a institution or system who might need this information for the connectivity to many of us that's certified on this JAM card right now, I don't know what else to really say, but I would say take this to those that have the funding tied to the infrastructure dollars and point out where there's opportunities to actually do business with us intentional on these infrastructure projects.
You said it much better than I did, Miss Nicholas.
Miles, Daniela asked, from the data you all gathered, which sectors seem to offer the greatest opportunities for growth or improvement?
That's a really fascinating question. That's really difficult to answer as well, because this is so place-based. One of the things that I've been grappling with is how different each metro area looks from the next, which is probably why it's so difficult to craft, like, you know, national policy that is effective everywhere. I think it's nigh on impossible to do so. So it really depends on the place. And that's both a picture of representation, like where industries exist in the first place, but also probably many things that aren't captured in this tool. So like where we're not looking at the ecosystem or the strength of technical assistance networks or anything related to supporting small businesses in these communities, just the differences that exist in the data as it stands. So those are actually really good opportunities for folks like y'all to jump in and make use of this tool, connect it to research about those networks, or if you represent one of those networks, to tap in, or if you're a business owner who sees a need in your community for these things, to advocate for it. So that's probably not a very satisfying answer, but it really does depend on the place. Yeah. I know we're coming up on time here, so unless there's any final questions, I'll close things out and hand them back to Brian.
Thanks, Miles, for facilitating that, and thank you, David and Betsy, for joining on that panel, and for the whole ICIC team for inviting us into this collaboration and supporting us in this project and on this webinar. I think what Miles just said at the end there was a great way to close this out, in that for folks on the call who are using this tool in novel ways or are seeking to influence policy at the local, state, or national level, or have other questions for us, please feel free to reach out to myself at Small Business Majority, as well as Miles and Devin at the ICIC team. We would love to hear that. For us, we see using this tool in perpetuity for our work, and hopefully updating it over time, and would love to learn more about how we can support your local communities from our perspective as a national policy advocacy change organization, and how you might be using the tool that might spur other ideas for us as we seek to improve it moving forward. But once again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to join us. I know you all are very busy, and appreciate you spending the hour with us, and have a great rest of your week. Thank you.